our series in future of cybersecurity. So this is the 11th one in the series. Been running it for about 3.5 years now. We do 3 a year, this one is on cybersecurity and democratic processes, and in particular the emphasis on technology's influence in the year of elections. So we noticed back in January that 2024 was going to be a big year for elections. We didn't quite notice back then that we were going to be in the middle of an election campaign, so that makes this particularly interesting and timely. But in any case, it's a constant topic of interest. So that's going to be our session. So this is an event that's sponsored by the University of Surrey and by SASIG jointly, and we'll have a welcome from each of us and just explain a bit about where we're coming from, and then we'll get into the talks. So yeah, just to highlight kind of emphasize the interest that we have. This is a great engraving for Hogarth about 250 years ago. Sorry? Oh gosh, I've been reminded that I need to do the housekeeping. I was getting enthusiastic already. So fire exits are at the back, the doors there, and then the muster point is the hideout over the way. The microphones are in the ceiling. You see these. So if you're speaking anywhere in the room, you will be picked up. So keep your kind of quiet conversations with your neighbours down, because it will all get picked up on the recording. And a reminder to mute any devices that you have, so we don't have phones going off and so on. We're going to have questions at the end of the talk. So anyone online, please post your questions in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. And those of you that are in the audience, make a note of your questions and you'll get a chance to ask them at the end. And there'll be photos being taken of the event as well. So if you would prefer not to be in any of the photos that we may use for publicity afterwards, then please let the photographer know. So James at the back with the camera. If you don't want to be in any photos, then let him know. Right, that was the housekeeping. So here, this was an election, a polling station 250 years ago. There's this guy voting here. You notice he doesn't have a secret ballot. Actually, only about 2% or something of the population could vote. Only men in that time. So they had very different kinds of issues and very different kinds of problems. We've come on a long way since then. We have the secret ballot, universal suffrage, etc. But even 20, 30 years ago, we didn't have some of the problems that we have now, particularly around technology. So the way the seminar will work this afternoon, we have 4 great speakers that will talk about various aspects of how technology can have an impact, does have an impact or influence on elections. So we'll introduce each of them as we go. We have these 4 great talks, and each of them will give their talk, and we will save all the questions for a panel discussion that we will have at the end. So we'll have a panel session at the end of that. So write down your questions and keep them going. So I'm Steve Schneider. I'm from the Surrey Centre for Cybersecurity. I'll just give you a brief welcome about what Surrey Centre for Cybersecurity is about. And then our other sponsor, SASIG, I will then invite Danny King to tell you about SASIG and what's coming up. And then we'll get into the talks. So Surrey Centre for Cybersecurity has been at the university here for about 10 years, and it's been growing constantly year on year. In fact, we are very proud that last year we won Cyber University of the Year 2023. So here's the award. And we also have recognition from the National Cybersecurity Centre as an academic centre of excellence, both in cybersecurity research and in cybersecurity education. So we have these kind of external accolades or external recognition as being a centre of excellence and expertise in cybersecurity. We've got about 60 researchers. We work in foundations and applications of cybersecurity, and also we're interested in multidisciplinary research. So the Surrey Security Network, which is right across the university, across all three faculties, is led from the Surrey Centre for Cybersecurity. And we also have close connections with the Surrey Institute for People-Centred AI. So there's increasing overlap between AI and cybersecurity and issues around that. And in fact, well, one of our speakers is from the Institute for People-Centred AI, and there was a related seminar last month on AI and with related to elections. So this is a kind of follow-on or twinned with that particular seminar. And we do all sorts of external engagement and outreach, such as this seminar. We have great project funding, etc. So there's a big activity. But part of this outreach is also we're always interested in talking to new people, meeting new potential partners, and talking to us about where we can collaborate. So the particular application domains. So this is my standard slide talking about the application domains that we have strength in. So I won't go through these, but particularly notice that under government, verifiable election integrity with voter privacy. So one of our research areas, and areas of strength we have a group, is in electronic voting and making that secure and verifiable. So this is an area that's particularly close to our heart, and that's the area that I work in as well. So it's close to my heart. So I will stop there, and I'll invite Danny King, Managing Director of SASIG, to give a welcome from SASIG's point of view. So I'm hoping that he will request control of the screen. I can approve that.
Super. Steve, thank you very much for that introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be joining you today. For those that are new to SASIG, the Security Awareness Special Interest Group is a free networking forum for cybersecurity professionals. So we aim to improve trust and confidence in today's online environment through all of our regular masterclasses and networking sessions. And they're based on the latest subjects that our community are seeking to discuss, such as what we will be doing so today. We're growing rapidly. I'm delighted to say that we now have around 10,000 members, representing over 4,000 organisations from across the UK and around the world. And as Steve mentions, today is the 11th event that we've collaborated with the Surrey Centre. So my many thanks goes out to everybody at the Surrey Institute for working with us today on this ongoing series, as well as our thought leaders who will be sharing their knowledge with us today. We're also grateful for all of SASIG supporters for whom we simply couldn't do all that we do without them as well. So our many thanks to those. Now, SASIG produces daily webinars throughout the year, looking at a whole variety of different subject matters. And here's just a selection of some of those that are coming up. So this Friday, we're joined by Commissioner Pete O'Doherty of the City of London Police to learn how the UK is improving its response to cybercrime and his review of the recent data breach that impacted forces in Northern Ireland. And then next Tuesday, ahead of the, bear with me one moment, that seems to have, they seem to have had a life of their own. Bear with me one moment, there we are. And then ahead of Cybersecurity Awareness Month this October, we consider which specific behaviours and risks our programme will influence our workforce and demonstrate the best value of those. On Wednesday, we explore how the visibility of our estate can positively impact risk, looking at the gaps that scanners miss and reducing patch lag. And then next Friday, we explore some recent high-profile examples of misdirected emails and what the consequences of those were, and consider what we can do about that as well. Now, SASIG also offers over 30 in-person events every year, so that's 3 times a month in London and around the UK, and those are streamed online live as well for the most part. So next Thursday, we have an event aimed at the healthcare sector, which explores the latest technology that we can employ and the challenges around that technology. And it's not too late to apply for that. So if you do so today, we're closing registration for that tomorrow, so that's still available today for you. And then the following week, we examine the latest AI technology and its impact on security, resilience, legacy systems, and the threats landscape. And then later in the month, we discuss how the board views cyber and consider how we can best communicate that vital business risk to the board. And then after we take a well-deserved summer holiday, we kickstart September in Edinburgh and explore how the delicate balance between awareness and resilience is paramount in today's rapidly evolving cyber landscape. Now, later in September, we urge you also to join us at our International Cyber Expo. So this is a fantastic opportunity to network with top-level cybersecurity professionals and from the many experts available to us over those 2 days. And also to make sure that you follow SASIG on LinkedIn and have a deep dive into our events coming up, as well as the webinar library that's built nicely with lots of interesting and useful cybersecurity content over the last few years. Now, before I hand back over to Steve, just a quick cover of a few house rules. So the Chatham House Rule is in effect. So we do ask you to please respect our speakers today, our questioners, and all the attendees, and ask you not to attribute what has been said back to them. We've a great networking session afterwards for those in Guildford, so please do take that opportunity to make your 5 new friends. And today is also about learning, so we encourage everyone, both in Surrey and online, to ask questions. And if you haven't already, do now place your phones on silent. We welcome your feedback, and there will be a QR code on screen in the bottom left-hand corner at the end of today. And we do urge you to scan that and let us know what you thought of today, as it's only by you letting us know what you've liked that we can continue to offer it as well. And lastly, do tell your friends, colleagues, peers, and all of your cybersecurity friends about SASIG. The sasig.com, that is where it is all at. Please do also look at today's event over at the sasig.com for links to connect with today's speakers on LinkedIn. And before I go, as well as the auditorium in Surrey, hello to everybody joining us online. Can I ask you, and I've seen some of you already do so, that in turn you say hello to one another in the chat function and let us know whereabouts you are joining us from. We have the fabulous Abby from the SASIG team looking after our online audience today. She'll also be overseeing the questions and comments that come in online so they can be posed to our speakers afterwards. So other than that, please do enjoy the fantastic presentations that we've got coming up. And Steve, back to you. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thanks, Danny. So I'm very pleased to welcome all 4 speakers, but first of all, Professor Rachel Gibson, who has come down from Manchester to be with us today, a Professor of Politics at Manchester, who's going to be talking about AI and the general election. So over to you.
Well, and thank you very much for inviting me. I don't often get to speak in front of kind of predominantly computer science audience or data science audience. So this is I wouldn't say first for me, but be gentle. I'm a social scientist, and I'm very interested in obviously the understanding around cybersecurity, particularly from the perspective of elections. The work that I do. The work that I do is at the moment linked to a project. So I have an ERC, an Advanced Investigator Grant, that is looking at digital campaigning in electoral democracies. And we've been looking at this in the UK, in the US, Poland, France, and Germany over the last 4 years. And the question about AI and is AI a threat to democracy and what could we expect in this election coming up has come up quite a lot. And I should say, actually, at the start of the project, it's quite interesting that wasn't something that we began with. I think this is kind of crept up within the last 6 months, a year. It certainly wasn't on my research proposal when I first put it in, but it is certainly something that I think over the course of the project, we're now seeing has become much more prominent. And I think the narrative around it, as these headlines from various magazines, The Economist, but also scholarly work and reports from various centres, sort of think tanks, really do highlight this kind of idea that AI is seen as a harm to democracy, or it's got this kind of potential for really quite negative effects. And so the question I have, I suppose, is really, what does AI bring to campaigning? And this is actually interesting. What Steve showed by the original slide with the voter sort of sitting somewhere. At that time, campaigning was very, I wouldn't say it was any tech, right? It was low tech. And there has actually been, and I kind of, in a different presentation, I have actually talked about the idea that campaigns go through phases and they respond to technology, but there's also obviously the technology is being shaped by the society. And so there's been this kind of shift over time in different phases that campaigning has taken. And I think we're entering what people would sort of see now as a sort of a fourth sort of phase, which is actually all about data and data-driven campaigning. So it kind of is that there's a tie-in here with sort of AI and data-driven as being this kind of new era, and what does this bring to campaigning? And I think before we go to all the negatives and think about all the bad stuff, it is important to kind of think about that could bring some good stuff as well. So there are some aspects about AI that have been discussed and theorized as being, potentially quite helpful. So they obviously bring an increased efficiency and automation of the kind of routine tasks that a campaign needs to do, like, sort of prepare and send out emails, donation emails or text for donation emails. There's also an opportunity to better understand the electorate's preferences and tailor information to match their needs and interests in a way that we kind of intuited before perhaps, but now we have much more data and it's more readily available. Also, arguably as well, the ability to educate, to inform citizens more quickly about the issues that matter to them and the choices that are open to them. And there's also a question a little bit about the sort of power aspect that, AI does potentially level the media playing field, because there is an argument that it could offer the capacity for smaller parties, challenger parties with limited resources to mount a stronger campaign. On the flip side, of course, and these are probably where the most discussion is at the moment, is that they bring opportunities to spread dis and misinformation through the creation of sort of viral content, particularly deepfakes, caused a lot of consternation, false audio recordings, and kind of construction of fictional events. There's also a presentation of kind of inaccurate and misleading information to voters in a way that's not necessarily done in a malign fashion. It's just that the AI sort of goes wrong, or sort of hallucinates and kind of tells people things that are not true. So as of now, I think recently there was, kind of informing voters, various chatbots were telling the outcome of the UK and the US election before it's even happened, which obviously based on the fact that everybody thinks, well, in the UK at least, that Labour will win. So they're being told, yes, Labour has already won. I think now that I also heard a story where they were asking who won the previous elections, and it was unable to say, or something about that information was not open. So it wouldn't actually tell you who won the last, the 2016, kind of implying that it was up for grabs or it was uncertain. So there are these problems with just, the information that is coming out. There's also potential around this idea of the power structure. So there may be a rebalancing perhaps towards smaller parties, but there's also a lot of concern about the fact that AI is obviously potentially replicating biases that exist. And so there's a kind of reinforcement of kind of power structures in society through the fact that it's, it's using existing biases, and what you get out of it is going to be what goes into it. And then even if debunked or kind of countered, these kind of subversive interventions clearly decrease, or will have the capacity to decrease voters' trust in parties and their leaders, and potentially also the election result. It's just easier to believe that it was rigged or manipulated. So this is the sort of two sides of the coin. And as I said, I think at the moment, the attention is really probably on these first two problems. As we hit this election year, as Steve said, we're in a kind of bumper election year. And so I think that the kind of attention to the idea of attempts to intervene, attempts to change the outcome, everybody's primed for it and almost waiting for that kind of big story about, something that's happened that's meant that an election has been changed. I think there's less attention perhaps on the trust issues in the longer term, but those things I think arguably, as I say at the end, are perhaps the more important and where we should be looking. So, okay, so sorry for kind of, I do have some pictures to follow this one, but this is the kind of the textual stuff. But so far, so negative. And I think this is just some examples of how, if you look through the stories about AI and elections, you can basically find that there's just a lot of stories about the attempts that have been used that have been malicious or have led to or potentially led to an unfair outcome. So looking back in Turkish election in May 2023, there were claims by the opposition candidate that an online fake video was used to discredit him by President Erdogan, who he showed a campaign video just prior to the actual election that linked his rival to the PKK, which the Turkish government was deeming was a terrorist group. And then in the 2023 election, there was an example where the Polish election civic platform released an ad on Meta that mixed genuine clips of the words that were spoken by the Prime Minister with fake ones that were generated by AI, that were essentially reading out sections of leaked emails in his inbox that had come from the former Chief of Staff, which basically showed that there was division and dissension within the United Rights Coalition. Probably the one that has attracted most attention, I think, in terms of potentially having an impact on the outcome was the deepfake audio that was posted just 2 days prior to the Slovakian election, where the leader of the Progressive Slovakian Party and a journalist were allegedly or heard to be discussing how to rig the election, and particularly by buying votes from the Roma minority. And then, of course, we did see in this country evidence that in October last year, where there was a kind of big hoo-ha when a 25-second, I don't know if any of you actually saw it, because they've removed it now. I was fortunate enough to see it, was released on X by an unknown, well, we do have the name of the person who released it, was of Keir Starmer berating his staff. I say berating, I mean, it was a tirade of abuse, which was not true, but was actually picked up and believed initially, or it was questioned, first of all, before it was debunked. So it sort of did the rounds. And then in the US, I mean, this is kind of the one that everybody's watching in terms of what's happening there. And there've been some examples where not just malign sort of forces, if you like, have been using it, but AI has been actually used legitimately by the Republicans, that they created an AI video. I'll show it after this. That was just after Joe Biden announced he was running for re-election. They issued a kind of apocalyptic scenario of this will end the world effectively. But they do have a clear marker that they say this was AI generated. In the call, I say clear, it's kind of in the left-hand corner, a bit fuzzy. And then Ron DeSantis, in his bid to kind of undermine Trump, had released some video that contained fake AI images that was sort of showing Donald Trump in a sort of embrace of Anthony Fauci, and obviously trying to kind of link him, or his weakness, as DeSantis perceived it, on the COVID response and the vaccinations. And then also there was, again, a big controversy about the fake robocalls from Joe Biden earlier in the year, urging Democrats to skip the primary and not vote. This is just to sort of show you some examples. So this was the fake, well, sorry, this is not, this is a real video, but it's a fake scenario of the.
This just in, we can now call the 2024 presidential race for Joe Biden.
My fellow Americans.
This morning, an emboldened China invades Taiwan.
Financial markets are in free fall as 500 regional banks have shuttered their doors.
Border agents were overrun by a surge of 80,000 illegals yesterday evening.
Officials closed the city of San Francisco this morning, citing the escalating crime and fentanyl crisis.
Who's in charge here? It feels like the train is coming off the tracks.
Do I need to stop? Interlude there. Calm everybody down. But I think the thing I was trying to sort of show is that there's kind of like maybe gradations in which AI is being used. So there's kind of, and did you see the thing in the corner with the AI? It was very sort of faint. I mean, the point is that people may not have seen that. They may not realize, they may actually think this is Joe Biden, he's going to do all these things. We should vote for him. So there's this kind of scare tactic that I guess you could argue is being useful. And then you can also see the images that DeSantis used. Oh, and we just, yeah, there's images that DeSantis used, which were kind of sort of mixing real with fake images, and then the robocall, which was just completely fictionalized or completely fake. It was a fake of Joe Biden. So there's kind of a blurring of AI in terms of outright lies, if you like, versus a kind of use of it, which arguably is within the law. I come back to kind of this question of authenticity and does this really matter? But just to sort of say that in the UK, at least as well, I don't know if you've seen Steve, AI Steve. Is that anybody know? So introducing AI Steve. So we have a candidate running in Brighton, which is the brainchild of an independent candidate. He actually tried to register a party, Smarter UK, but wasn't registered in time, so I guess he wasn't smart enough. But the avatar basically is on all of his campaign material. And he has a campaign website that basically uses to consult with local people on a range of issues. He puts forward the policy ideas. They asked for suggestions, and he argues, or he says, that if he's elected, only those with 50% plus the support will be taken forward. So this is a genuine attempt. He is not going to sit in Parliament if elected, apparently. I mean, it will be Steve Endicott that will go, but Steve will be the voice or the mouthpiece of AI Steve, who is the real candidate. I think, given that I think he's run before, I think he got about 470 votes, so I don't think he's going to win. But it is an interesting thing, because I think, again, it kind of implies that there's a question here, and I maybe pick this up in the discussion, about how we're moving towards perhaps more direct democracy through AI, and if this is actually a good thing, because this kind of taps into this kind of idea of populist sort of the rise of, you know, do we want our representatives to sort of represent us, or do we think that they should be driven by what popular demands they pick up through the AI? So if anybody's interested in terms of just mapping, you know, where these events are happening, where elections are kind of at threat or under risk, Wired have a very good website, a very good resource that you can use, which is auditing all of the elections this year, and they're asking for people to send in examples of where these instances have occurred. So this is their kind of European section or archive. They have one for North America. They have one in Asian elections. They also had one for Africa as well, but I think there's only one so far that they've tracked, which is Eminem in South Africa. It was a fake Eminem trying to influence the vote against the ANC. This is a report which I, again, would sort of recommend to people to have a look at in terms of understanding the potential of AI, in terms of affecting the threat, what is the threat level to the UK general election. Basically, this report is quite extensive. They've gone through and they've looked at 112 national elections which have taken place since January 2023. And of these, they find just 19 was showing AI interference. And as of 2024, they argue that there's been no evidence so far of a significant change in election results as a result of the AI being used. But they do make the point that actually it's the longer term, what they call second order effects, that we need to really think about, which is actually that you know, there's a trust factor here, which is very important, because if people begin to distrust what they see, what they read, what they hear online, it will have a long-term consequence for democracy, and this is where we actually do need to really be careful. In terms of the final sort of thing, that I suppose in terms of my own reading of it, a few reasons perhaps not to panic, or why the bad news might not be quite so bad. I think one of the things that is important to remember, and this is going back again to the history of campaigns, right, and putting it in context, there's a bit of a plus ça change argument here, which is that conspiracy theories really aren't anything new. The use of kind of these fake robocalls, images, they have been used in the past. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember well, it's 2004, so it's not that long ago, but there was an altered image of then Democrat presidential nominee John Kerry and actress Jane Fonda, which depicted them at an anti-war protest. And that was circulated quite widely online to undermine John Kerry. So this is kind of even prior to, you know, sort of the AI kind of revolution. We do see these things have happened in the past. I suppose it's the scale perhaps now and the speed with which it can take place. The other thing to bear in mind is that modern political campaigns and elections, and this comes back to my earlier point about authenticity and does it matter? You know, there is an argument, and this is going with my kind of critical sort of perhaps theory head on, that there's always kind of been an inauthenticity about campaigns, that they've got manufactured kind of elements to them. And what is quite real? And I think there's an interesting book that I reread coming to this event by Daniel Burston about the American election in the 1960s. He was looking back in the 1950s, and he talked then about this idea of how the media introduced pseudo events, and the arrival of AI might simply just be seen as perhaps a more enhanced version of this kind of simulated sort of reality. And I think perhaps if we see inauthenticity in a kind of maybe on a sliding scale rather than a sort of binary authentic, inauthentic, then you sort of raise the question. I'm not saying this makes it any better, but there is a kind of question of, you know, how much more damaging are some of these images in terms of if we see politics and campaigning as performative in its own right. I think the other thing is the push towards AI is being matched, if you like, with a counter trend by campaigns and candidates that really now do seek to kind of push some kind of engagement with voters that is more authentic. So they're reverting to kind of more conversational messaging rather than kind of overproduced adverts. They use influencers. So this is just an example. The Biden campaign was very keen to recruit people that would carry its message, and they had big sort of, they brought these people in, they network with them, they talk to them, can we use you effectively to transmit our message, because it works much better when it comes from a trusted third party. There's also an emphasis on what's called relational organizing, which is about getting people to take your message out in almost like a stealth sort of way, and talk about the campaign, but not necessarily from a perspective of, I want to convert you to vote for Joe Biden, but to kind of seed it into the conversations in a natural way in terms of other types of forums like Mumsnet and things like that. You can kind of develop a conversation. And then, as I said, politicians kind of taking that more conversational stance through podcasts and trying to kind of relate to people in a more human sort of way. So there is that kind of trend, although one can argue, is that just managed authenticity? Is it kind of, anyway. And I think that another point to raise perhaps is the concerns about AI and its impact on society and distrust. They are real, and you can see from evidence, Pew in particular has been very good about the Pew Research Centre, has shown that people's concerns about AI is growing, and its impact on daily life, its impact on elections. People are worried, and a majority of people are worried. But if you look at some of the individual level studies that run kind of controlled experiments where people are exposed to AI content and then human content, the results actually don't necessarily support the idea people are less trusting of AI. There are certainly contexts in which they actually they're slightly more trusting. So I wouldn't say necessarily that we should look at the big aggregate picture, but you can argue when people use it and use it in a certain way, and it will become more usable. It might, from their own experience, they might become less distrustful or more kind of literate, perhaps, in terms of how they understand it. And I think the final thing is just to say it's difficult for AI to create what we call sticky narratives, and that's what's important in campaigning, is that narrative and kind of getting people to kind of believe in you and side with you. You can have all the best policies in the world, but if you can't kind of weave that into a story that voters believe and they see you as credible, it's been found, people have tried to do Facebook ads where they fed in a particular profile and it comes back and it's just not particularly believable. So that I'd stop there. And sorry, I know I ran over, but yeah, I think basically, as I said, maybe it's not time to panic quite yet.
Well, thank you, Rachel. It's a very encouraging and positive message. So next up, we have Sasha Radimirovich from the Surrey Centre for Cybersecurity, that will be talking about electronic voting and the kind of state of the art and where things are going.
Thank you, Steve. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks, Steve, for inviting me to this event. So I'll talk about general elections over the internet. It's going to be a technical talk. It's going to be a bit fast because I have too much material. I hope you don't mind. I'll go even a bit further back than Rachel just did. I'll go to the 2000 US presidential elections. This was the first time that citizens in the US could actually cast votes over the internet. This would have been newsworthy, except that that was also the year where we had the closest race for president in the US in history. And it hung over an issue with 1960s era punch card voting machines. In the state of Florida, the race was going to be decided. People that had cast votes said something wasn't working well. The race was closed, so a recount was ordered, and people found out that these punch card voting machines weren't punching holes just right through the voting cards. This meant that a lot of votes were not counted that should have been counted. There were legal battles. It took 37 days to resolve the mess. So as a consequence of this, punch card voting machines were banned. The government provided money for the states to purchase electronic voting machines. There were also laws what these voting machines had to comply with, such as having a paper trail that allows the auditing of the votes cast. But the machines that the states purchased did not have, were not complying with the law. They did not have any particularly good security. In fact, they were shown to be insecure and faulty. This put a very bad reputation for these voting machines. And I think it has influenced it to this day. Meanwhile, around the same time, just in Europe, Switzerland and Estonia started not just electronic voting projects, in fact, internet voting projects. Estonia soon became the first country to hold municipal elections and general elections over the internet, while Switzerland, 20 years later, to this day, is still in a trial phase for internet voting. So one country out there doing it for, 20 years now, the other one still in trial phase. What has gone wrong? Well, let's look at what could go wrong in any election. The first three things that perhaps come to mind are, election fraud, foreign interference, and the voting machine issues that I already alluded to. And we know for most of these how to handle them. This information, I refer you to Rachel's talk just a minute ago. But for the others, so for election fraud, transparency, laws and punishment, as well as free voting procedures, such as a secret vote, have helped to mitigate the issues that we have. For voting machines, certifications and audits provide the type of transparency that we do at the ceremony level of an election, and that should provide us with confidence that the voting machines work well. So what would change if we move all of this to the internet? Well, in short, everything scales up. Our so-called attack surface increases dramatically because we not only have now a machine and a poll site to worry about, we also have the network, the voting client, the voting server, all of which must be implemented correctly to worry about. We have a much increased complexity of software that we need to worry about. There's more hardware in the back end that we need to worry about. And therefore, the procedures are much more complex. We need to worry about this. A lot more trust has to be placed depending on regulations. You may have to just trust the software or the hardware vendors that everything that they have done works all right, or else you have to trust the academics that they know what they're talking about when they say they have a proof of security. Other experts you need to trust are the ones that say they understand code and they can audit snippets of it. To further deeper explain the complexity that arises, let me perhaps just start with how simple a voting ceremony could be. Steve's picture at the very beginning today showed one poll site voting procedure. Well, we can do it even simpler. In some municipalities in Switzerland, this is still being done. You assemble everybody near the town hall. You vote by raising your hands. It doesn't scale well. That's its first problem. And the second one, of course, it's not a free voting procedure because everybody sees how everybody else voted. It's easy to verify that the tally is right, but you're not free. So we solve this with hardware such as those punch card voting machines. And if we do it well, everybody understands how such a machine works. We can easily audit it. We can verify that it is reliable. If we maintain it well, which they didn't do back in 2000, this would actually be a perfectly fine solution. If we then do go towards electronic voting, we have what I just said, the software to worry about. If we go to internet voting, and this is the part I couldn't show you earlier, is we have these voting protocols to worry about, and they rely on cryptographic primitives that we also have to worry about. For an average voter, a simple hardware, such as a punch card voting machine, is easy to understand. They understand what's happening to their vote. When we move to complex software, no voter will understand how they vote. If they perhaps see a nice green tick mark on a screen, they get a confident feeling that, yes, something must have done, that this machine must have counted their vote, for instance. But in fact, they do not understand what just happened. And even experts will not easily verify the software. It is very difficult to find bugs in complex software. Funny enough, the voting protocols and the crypto primitives, which then to an average voter will be far beyond understanding, for us from the academic perspective, this is the part that we best understand. We have had 50 years of research now into, from public key cryptography to how to actually do, receipt-free secret ballot elections over the internet. We have researched these things. We know what we can and cannot do. We know how to prove the security of those. I'm stopping here not in the year 2024, I'm stopping at the end of the 90s because, well, after 30 years of research, in fact, two companies thought we are ready to do internet voting. So Cytel, founded in 2001, provided internet voting systems for, well, Switzerland and a few other countries. And just a little before that, Cybernetica, another company, developed in Estonian internet voting systems. Both of these companies came from actually researchers that at first knew what they were doing. So what happened then, let's say, with Estonia? Well, the first system that they proposed did not have, well, first of all, it was closed source. So it was not a transparent system that anybody could inspect, but this was common at the time. But also it did not have end-to-end verifiability. So in fact, nobody was given any assurance that a vote that you're casting was really cast correctly. It all relied on trust in the system operators. However, in 2013, when an international team was allowed to observe the operations in the general elections of 2013, the team observed poor operational security of those system administrators that all the trust was placed in. In other work, researchers found and showed proofs of concept of how easy it was to change votes covertly. Well, let me move on to Switzerland. Around the same time, so 2004 to 2012, Switzerland was in its trial phase with systems that were no better than what Estonia had. They lacked verifiability, they were closed source, and well, just like in Estonia, cryptographers were raising alarms that this is insecure, we cannot do this. So in 2013, the Swiss Federal Chancellery, which regulates the voting trials and internet voting in Switzerland, decided that to be allowed to have more than 30% of the electorate of a canton participate in an internet vote, the system had to provide some form of verifiability. And not only 30% of a canton, it also cannot have been more than 10% of the entire national electorate, just to keep the risks contained. Well, no system actually passed the 50% bar, which was a higher bar for verifiability. In 2018, the government additionally required that any voting system that was going to be used had to be open source. By this time, so initially we had about 3 different voting systems in Switzerland that went through the first trials. 2, I think, remained for the second set of trials. And by 2018, we had 1 system remaining, the one that Cytel developed, and Swiss Post is the provider of. So as soon as Swiss Post opened the source code, critical vulnerabilities were found so bad that the system had to be withdrawn. So it was back to the drawing board. In 2020, the trials were redesigned, more transparency was brought in. Again, all trials were now limited back to 30%, but complete verifiability has been required. So I keep talking about verifiability. Let me quickly explain to you what complete verifiability means. It consists of 2 components. One is, from the voter's perspective, individual verifiability. This is essentially law in Switzerland, but it corresponds to what security or cryptographers define verifiability of for voting protocols as well. So for individual verifiability, the law requires that a voter is able to verify that the vote that they entered into their device is the vote that was registered by the trustworthy system. The other part, universal verifiability, then requires that auditors can verify that any vote that was registered by the trustworthy system has actually been included in the tally. So you have 2 sets of verifiers. One, the voter that knows their own vote. The other one, the auditors that see the votes that were cast. And together, the idea is that we have complete verifiability. In principle, not very complicated. The complications arise because we also have to keep all the votes secret. So these 2 together is a very difficult thing to achieve. Well, overall, what this means is we trust in our ability to verify the voting protocols and the cryptographic primitives. But the law goes further. The compliance requirements say that Swiss Post, as the provider, not only needs to provide these proofs of security, But then the Federal Chancellery commissions international experts, in our case, Steve Schneider, Ivona, that I just thought I saw, yes, and myself, are then checking whether such proofs actually hold water. We write a report to it that is then submitted to the Federal Chancellery, which then publishes it on its website for everybody to understand or see that these proofs are actually correct. At the software level, I already mentioned they require open source software. So they, again, commission experts that will vet the software. But of course, this is a much harder part. So they also rely on the general public with incentives such as a bug bounty to look through this software, submit their reports. For hardware and the voting ceremony, I'll get back to, we have to make some trust assumptions there. In my perhaps 2 minutes, 3, is that? 3. Getting through this. In my 3 minutes, I'll try to quickly explain to you, so what does this really look like for a voter? For those of you who cannot read this, pit.evoting.ch, PIT stands for Public Intrusion Test. You could, in fact, these days, log in and do this at your own time and see how voting works in Switzerland. So this is the public intrusion test that currently is live by Swiss Post so that the public can scrutinize the system. So this is a ballot that a voter would receive at home. It has 2 questions. Do you like Swiss chocolate or do you like cheese fondue? It comes with codes that correspond to any of the answers that you could give to these. And it comes with codes that seem like an initialization code, a confirmation code, and the final code. All of these codes are unique to each voter. None of these codes are known to any component that is live during the election. So only the voter knows any of this, and without knowledge of this, you will not be able to get to the end of the system. This is the short story in case Steve kicks me out of here. More precisely, what happens is you start as the voter entering what looks like an overly long password, but actually this thing is never transmitted from your browser. The blue frame shows the browser window. This is never transmitted to the server. The browser just uses this to create or derive keys. So it's like a seed for the browser to derive cryptographic keys. Based on some of these keys, the browser authenticates the voter to the system, but then uses some other derived keys of it to actually later encrypt the voter's votes. So at this point, in principle, the browser could cast any vote for the voter. When the voter has filled in their choice and tells this browser, well, encrypt this, send it over, what happens is in the back end, there's 4 independent hardware components that have independent keys that partially decrypt the vote that they received. Each of them can partially decrypt it. The voting server in the middle, all it can do is combine them into what happens through cryptographic magic to be exactly the codes that correspond to the voter's choice. If any part of the system were trying to manipulate this, change the vote, well, they would get other codes and they would not know the codes that they actually have to return. Therefore, if the voter can match the codes they see on the screen to the codes that they see on the voting sheet, they have confirmation that the correct vote was registered by the trustworthy part of the system. However, at this point, the trustworthy part of the system doesn't know whether this is really what the voter wanted, and therefore, the next step for that voter is to again type in a code that no part of the system knows, that then confirms to the trustworthy part of the system that yes, this is what the voter wants. And then finally, the voter receives the final code back from that trustworthy part of the system in order for the voter to know that the browser indeed did submit the vote. Fantastic. So in summary, what we have in this system is technically perhaps not state-of-the-art in terms of all the cryptography that is involved, but it is state-of-the-art in the process that the Swiss government has taken into getting internet voting delivered. They are not rushing through this. They are taking seriously the feedback that they're getting from both the academic as well as the public community. And they're in cooperation with the academic community designing security requirements that actually make sense from, well, a security expert's point of view. There are still challenges remaining. The trust assumptions that I hinted at with the 4 independent hardware components in the back. Well, the question is, can we do better there? And especially the voting ceremony now is a very complicated thing. to set up such a system, you have to trust that the people that are actually putting keys containing cryptographic codes onto independent hardware machines are actually doing this right, and they're not leaking these keys to somebody else. The Swiss law requires that there's always two people at least doing this. Is this enough? I don't know. Are all the procedures that they're doing really correct in this voting ceremony? Well, we don't have a formal method yet to verify this, but this is part of what I will be researching in the near future. Similarly to this, if any voter were to raise a complaint at the time right now, the Swiss the browser window will essentially tell them, stop voting here, don't submit anything, as in don't submit your confirmation code, go vote at the poll site or mail in your ballot. Not an optimal solution. The question is, how can we do better? And Catalin, a colleague of mine, is having a research project on this right now. Public trust was mentioned earlier. I am running out of time, so I will stop here.
Okay, thanks, Sasha. So next up. Oh, so yes. We're not using slides.
No, there's one slide for me. I think that it's
That was just before Sasha's one. I have a question with his name.
Okay, so next up, while we find the slide, very pleased to welcome Charles Creel from the Symposium Institute of Strategic Communications.
Yep.
Who will be talking about political and online political advertising, what's going on.
Hi, welcome. Thanks for the talks that y'all have given, and thanks to Steve, who I'm looking forward to getting signals from about how much time I have left, and to Danny for introducing us. I've spoken with Sasik a number of times, and Tarquin there as well for inviting me along. Thank you all for being here. I had prepared a talk today that I was going to discuss with you a study that I had done a couple of years ago with the International Foundation for Electoral Systems in DC. And we did what we thought at the time was the first global survey of online political advertising. But this morning when I got up, I found in my inbox an article by Renee DiRista in the New York Times. And frankly, I think you would be better off spending your time reading this article than listening to me today. It's called "What Happened to Stanford Spells Trouble for the Election." If you search it, I'm sure you'll find a free copy out there. Essentially, DiRista's research project at Stanford has been shut down. This has been a part of very deliberate political lobbying that has brought this research project down. Her project is critical. We're talking about Renee DiRista right now, right? We're not talking about your average academic like we might be. I'm somewhat below average academic because I don't work in academia very much anymore. I'm out in the field most of the time. But what the article does document is what happens when open society organizations that are operating with fairness and transparency are attacked by those with an authoritarian bent. And we've seen this happen many times before. In the United States, it's happened with National Public Radio, PBS, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which have always operated with open models and have boards of directors and so on. Then they've been attacked by people from a far right authoritarian perspective who've then come in and taken over the boards. And once they've taken over the boards, then they take over the programming, the direction of it. This comes from the far right. It comes from the far left as well. Something very equivalent has happened there. We've seen equivalent happen here. We've seen Soros democracy programs attacked. We've seen funded research programs around the world attacked. So it's worth going and having a look at Renee's report. She's done invaluable work with the DCMS Select Committee, which I've been special advisor to for a while now, although it doesn't exist because we're in an election. Now, there are reasons you might want to listen to what I have to say. Mostly, I've been dedicated to working around technology and democracy and disinformation and radicalization over the course of the last 15 years. Lots of field work, working in places that nobody wants to go. Of late, with Symposium Institute, we do a lot of work with organizations, national organizations, international organizations, mostly lately working with Ukraine, Belarus, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, etc. Promoting issues around democracy, educating people who will work in information and already are quite significant, but may find themselves working in information and providing information to the public in times when their country has been invaded or political situations may have changed drastically. I've also, for my sins, worked a lot in Iraq, etc. So anyway, I wrote a calm and reasonable, non-alarmist article for you. One more thing I should not forget. I'm the special advisor to the DCMS Select Committee on Disinformation. We brought down Cambridge Analytica, etc. Of all the bad places that I go, everywhere I go, I see Google, Facebook, Twitter. Lately, I see more, I see TikTok. Now I'm seeing Warpcast. I don't know if any of you are on Warpcaster. I'd recommend you go, actually. It's worth having a look at. And I also see a Cambridge Analytica or several Cambridge Analyticas, influence agencies that are working there to influence elections for the most part, or to influence opinion about issues of national importance. The fundamental issues here, and I'm here not necessarily to talk tech, but I'm here to talk about the cultural and political side of influence over elections, but how technology is being leveraged against open, fair, democratic elections and what's been happening there. We're in a unique situation right now, not because there's a general election happening in the UK, which is happening fairly reasonably. I mean, there's a lot of organized disinformation happening. Facebook is being leveraged for organized disinformation. I've been fed ads that are clearly disinformation ads from opposition candidates against the subject that they're discussing. And there's no way to trace that ad or who paid for it or where it came from, but the ad's there and it's served nonetheless. And I send it to either party when I get them. But this is happening here, but it's the UK and we're having a pretty good election. It's going pretty well. The United States is not quite the same at the moment. They're suffering significant disinformation issues, and there are authoritarian bents there that are worrying in ways that I'm happy to discuss over coffee, but perhaps not in a public forum. I just came back from a NATO thing and voiced my concerns to a number of people at the NATO thing. And in general, the response is, yeah, probably. That's probably going to happen. The least case scenario is 10 times January 6th. And so this is the unique situation that we find ourselves in a hyper disinformation environment. Again, I'm not necessarily partisan. I'm not necessarily addressing the left or the right, the extreme ends of both sides of the spectrum. And the number one concern that I have is how disinformation is leading to radicalization. Now, let's define radicalization very briefly. We're not talking about I have passionate belief in a particular political point of view, because that's quite common and many of us have that sort of thing. I've made 2 films about radicalization and about disinformation. And primarily, if you ask me in another format, I would say I'm a filmmaker. And this is most of the way that I spend my time when I'm not going places that we don't necessarily want to talk about. But radicalization is extreme belief in a political perspective that is very likely to lead to political violence and a violent act. And so this is the kind of thing that we're seeing. January 6th, we can classify as a violent terrorist incident following extreme radicalization that was leveraged online and exacerbated, not only by parties and forces within the country, but also by malign actors outside of the country. And the more research we see done on it, the more we see that this is the case. Now, the online political advertising report that I wanted to talk to you about actually did get presented. It was internal for IFAS, and it was also paid for by USAID. It was largely an internal report, but it did get presented at a conference at Stanford. A couple weeks later, I got banned for life from all Meta platforms. You can still find me out there because my middle name is Richard. Okay, so I've got a couple of developer accounts on those places. But the ban was interesting, and I've spoken to a couple of politicians who've experienced the same kind of thing. The report pointed out many of the advantages and disadvantages of social media, and these were brought up by you, Rachel. But that applied to social media in that case because we weren't quite dealing with AI to the degree that we are 2 years ago. Also, data-driven campaigning, which is a significant issue, and if you know who Cambridge Analytica are, you know that we're talking about that. But what we did find at the time is that online political advertising accounts for as much as 85% of spend globally now. The other thing that we learned about it, going country by country by country, is that it is nearly completely unregulated, which is mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. Imagine that a spend for a political party is completely unregulated, that you don't need to report it, that people don't necessarily need to say that this is a political ad and that it's being paid for by a particular party. The promotion is huge. The argument against regulation is in fact coming from the platforms where the advertising is happening. One of Facebook's early arguments was, well, there's not really room. There's not really space to say who paid for the ad. This is the kind of disingenuous approach that we're finding from the large networks. Where regulators have decided to act on this, however, we're also finding that they're often defanged almost immediately. And I would say I'm looking at the Electoral Commission on that and how their power has been removed as Bob Posner left office and someone else was being brought in. And then we're also seeing that they're often bought off. And in this case, I'm looking at the Information Commissioner's office. So we see it not only globally, but we see it in the UK. If it's hard here, and it is hard here, imagine how hard it must be in Indonesia, where influencers are largely used within campaigns. And of course, the global spend is not documented, but then that influencer spend is also not documented. In fact, I can find no case anywhere on the planet where influencer spend is being documented and regulated for online political advertising. Doesn't mean it's not there, can't prove the negative, but I can't find a case for it. Imagine how hard it might be in Kosovo, where the equivalent to Bob Posner was the head of the Electoral Commission until the defanging, said to me, well, with regard to social media and online, we're underwater and we're drowning. There is no amount of NGO help that we can send to countries that will compensate for the amount of damage we're sending them with online political advertising in the social media space. No amount of NGO work can do that. No amount of offering advice, no amount of money that we can spend can make up for the damage that's being done there. And it seems too that we are pretty much unwilling to properly regulate the space. I've worked for several years trying to regulate the space. And what happens is this: a political organization a politician will land in office having advertised on Facebook And then perhaps they will see the concern that is there around advertising on social media and the lack of regulation. And they may say, very much so, and investigate that they would like to regulate. But that what they'd really like to do is regulate after the next election. Because the way that they got there was unregulated online political advertising. And this creates a perpetuation of a lack of will in order to regulate the space. Now, imagine AI. If we can't regulate social media, we're in no shape whatsoever to regulate AI. Again, I just went to this NATO thing that I talked about, where much of the great and the good around the world dealing in the strategic communication space gathered together. And from information ministers from I saw one panel, just information minister from a prominent country. On that panel also was a Silicon Valley VC. And then someone else who I can't remember, I'm sorry. But what they did say and what they did have to say about this and artificial intelligence and disinformation and radicalization is that Facebook and Google say that they're not really seeing very much of it, so they don't regard it as an issue. So I don't want to scare y'all. You can take that as a reassurance. It's probably not that much of an issue. Okay. They didn't get away with it because my panel was the next one. So we took care of disabusing them of that notion. I do think that the primary issue in place here is one of disinformation leading to radicalization and how it impacts electoral systems. And again, I would refer you to January 6th and the lack of trust in elections. But I'd also like to talk, I'd like to say how I see AI impacting this beyond some of the issues, again, that Rachel brought up. Because rather than revisit those, let me talk about another one. I live in the Docklands in London. I love the Docklands. It's a fantastic place to live. It's brilliant. There's 2-bedroom, 2 baths along the river and along docks everywhere that you look, but it didn't used to be that way. It was the world's center of commerce. If you haven't been to the Docklands or know about it, I highly recommend that you go there. Up until a mass shift in technology happened, and that shift was container shipping. So rather than packing all the goods on ships and shipping it off, container ships, you just drop the whole piece that goes on a train onto container ships. So container shipping came along and made the Docklands irrelevant because ships can't get that far up the Thames that carry containers. And so whole communities shut down over the course of about 15 years. Margaret Thatcher decided to come in, redo the Docklands, make it 2-bedroom, 2-bath, make it a financial district for the entire world. And that was successful up until Brexit, and we can see how that goes. But what happened is there were communities there that everyone had lost their jobs. Plus, they knew they were about to lose their neighborhoods, and they had no idea what was going to happen to them next. So the extraordinary loss of importance of these people led to displacement within society. Now we're about to witness that kind of thing happen again. This is a room full of passionate people. I'm sure we're all passionate about what we do for a living. I'm sure we all also derive a great deal of our self-worth from what we do for a living. Once that is removed and you've become irrelevant, and let me tell you, if you'd said to me 2 years ago that every aspect of my working life would involve AI, I'd have said it would be quite silly, but now it does. And in fact, I'm ostensibly a specialist in this field. This is about to happen again, and I don't think any amount of universal basic income is going to stop the wave of radicalization from disinformation and its impact on election and electoral systems. I'll say again, bad things are about to happen in the US. Really, really quite distressing things. I think January 6 times 10 at a minimum. And when that happens, potentially bad things are going to happen in the EU that are far worse. So I came to talk reasonably and give you facts and figures, and instead I'd like to panic you a little bit and try to communicate to you the urgency of address that this issue needs from all of us. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you, Charles. So on to our final talk. I don't know what's happening with the slides, so we'll get it back on track. But very pleased to welcome from the Surrey Institute for People-Centered AI. And our final talk is from Bahare Hirave, who's going to talk about the growing impact of AI on journalism. And yeah, we've got the slide now. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here, and thanks for the introduction. So that's my name, and I am at the Institute for People-Centered AI half of the time at this moment. The other half, I'm at the BBC since this month. I am a fellow at the BBC R&D working on responsible AI literacy in the newsroom. So my work is on AI and news. We don't know much about cybersecurity, I'm afraid, but hopefully I will be able to tell you something interesting here in the context of AI and elections. So the stories start from the amount of data that we can access. So much data is generated compared to 15 years ago, let's say. So much of this data is recorded and so much of it is available to us. And from the journalism point of view, there are many, many stories in this data that could be told, but in the past, we were not able to access or we were not hearing about them. And this is changing the news cycle. So this change has been it started around 2010, when data became really a big thing for the newsroom because of the accessibility of data. And now in 2014, we are going through a different phase of this change, which is the kind of introduction of AI into newsrooms. Now, newsrooms, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more later, but newsrooms are not new to AI. Different newsrooms have been experimenting with the AI. As a researcher who's been working with the different newsroom or the news organizations since around 2012, I've been trying to get them use different AI technologies in their kind of breaking news detection or verification and so on. And journalists have been quite resistant to it, or if something doesn't quite work immediately, they're not necessarily so interested in it. But now with the kind of generative AI, the likes of ChatGPT, suddenly everybody understands AI, everybody wants to use it. So it's kind of made it a bit easier for us, in a sense, to implement AI in the newsroom. But suddenly this interest is so much and so competitive that it's kind of a little bit hard to see what's going on and where we should actually focus. So historically, a good journalist would have a notebook with some good numbers in it and people that they could reach and ask, what's happening now in, I don't know, about the general election in the UK, they could ask maybe somebody, some of the official offices to ask and confirm a story or write a story. Now this has changed. Their sources are enhanced. So the source is no longer only a person that they could call and get a response from. The source is now data. And then there's also many, many tools, more than that kind of telephone that they would pick up in the past. There are many tools that they can use to deal with their sources. So how are these tools used in journalism? Today I'm going to specifically focus on the use of AI tools in journalism and how AI can facilitate news production, news verification, and so on. So a couple of years ago, I think, before the generative AI or ChatGPT was released, I co-authored a paper on how AI is going to change journalism. And these were some of the categories that I identified in that paper on how AI can be used in news and journalism. So the categories that was identified was content discovery first, and that would include data newswires. So it's like journalists are used to having newswires such as the Reuters or Associated Press, Press Association in different countries. So instead of that, we could have data newswires using AI. Still hasn't happened, might happen. Personalized discovery is something that is already kind of happening with AI, and generative AI is helping with that. Newsworthiness assessment is a very interesting topic that I think with the help of generative AI, we can do a lot of that because it's so good kind of putting it in the context of all other news pieces and deciding whether or not it is newsworthy. Eyewitness detection and verification was something that I started working on in around 2013, 14. And that was before fake news kind of became a big topic. And during the kind of fake news, misinformation, disinformation phase, quite a few researchers started focusing on verification, maybe a little bit less on eyewitness detection, but these are also areas that AI could definitely help us tackle in the news context. Then the second category is kind of investigative analysis, where AI could be used for data cleaning, data wrangling, exploratory data analysis. Interestingly, LLMs are very good with statistics. I did not think they would be so good until one day recently I decided to use ChatGPT for a statistical analysis that I wanted to do, and I was kind of trying different tools to find out some statistic figures. And then I just decided to create a very clean Excel spreadsheet and give the data to ChatGPT and ask for the statistics that I wanted. And it did a great job, and it even told me what it means, which statistical tools do not do. So they are going to be very useful, even though they are LLMs or large language models are focused mainly on text, and they are actually pretty good or becoming pretty good with numerical statistics too. So they could be used hopefully for exploratory data analysis, some confirmatory analysis, pattern discovery, pattern analysis, outlier detection, maybe even network analysis in the future. I mean, definitely it will happen. It hasn't happened yet. Then we have semantic linking and contextualization, which have been the areas that have been quite close to the AI today, and news organizations have been using computational tools for that for the past 10, 12, 15 years. So semantic linking, natural language processing and linking has been happening again since 2013, 14 in newsrooms on their archives, because most news organizations have vast archives and they kind of use entity extraction and natural language processing to tag their archives. Then we can move to production and storytelling. And that's where has been really impacted by generative AI and the LLMs, is that this production side that has suddenly become so big with respect to the use of AI. So we can use AI for story lead construction and story lead recommendations. So a journalist or a person in general can say, I'm interested in these topics, and then AI tools can help them on a daily basis with suggestions of story leads and recommendations. Then now we have story generation. Quite a few times people asked me around 4 or 5 years ago if I think there would be automated story writing, which would replace journalists. And at that time I said, oh, I don't think so, not to that extent. I even remember sometimes I said, hopefully not. Now, obviously, it has completely changed. Automated story writing is no longer something that you would imagine. It's just very easy to do. The kind of problem here is how can we not do it? How can we make sure journalists or students or people are not just using automated content that's written by ChatGPT or other LLM tools? Narrative construction, again, these tools are very, very good in constructing narratives. They are not still used so much in data visualization, but I'm sure they will be very, very good very soon in visualizing your data, and you can even tell the tools, I want it this way, I want it this way, I want to change the color, I want to go up, I want to go down. Then there are data games that they're still not used in them, but I would not be surprised if they happen very soon too. Then we can move on to publishing and distribution. Again, that's kind of a bit more classic use of AI. Newsrooms have been using different AI tools in their publishing and distribution, but now they can use it for maybe personalized and recommendations a little bit more. But pretty much all of these semantic annotation, linking, they have been happening in the past 10, 12 years in the newsrooms, even though they may not have called it AI, they might have just called it computer. Preservation and archiving, similar to publishing and distribution. AI tools or technologies have been being used in newsrooms, but now it's just easier because they don't need to be very structured in terms of tagging their content or finding relevant content. They can do it in a kind of some organizations like the Bloomberg, for example, have their own GPTs, and you can very easily ask a question from over their archive, and it can kind of put it in context and create news stories for you very easily. And many organizations are now doing that. All right, so I'm gonna now quickly tell you how AI is being used in newsrooms, okay? And what are the challenges that journalists are facing. So since before 2019, all the kind of surveys and studies that were coming out was about the use of data in news and journalism. Since 2019, suddenly there was a shift and everybody was looking into the use of AI in news and journalism, 2019, 2022, 23. And now the speed is so much that when I sent my slides yesterday or the day before, then I realized there's a new report. So by day, there could be a new report and a new survey. So I was thinking the survey of surveys as research. So how AI is being used in newsrooms today, most journalists who are using AI in newsrooms, or most people, most staff members who are using it, they're using it for news production, news distribution, and news gathering. This is in 2023, and this report was actually, while it was published after the release of ChatGPT, the questionnaires went out before ChatGPT was released. So they're not exactly about the post generative AI ChatGPT. This one, however, this is from the Associated Press. They did it with partnership in universities. This was specifically about generative AI, and they asked how journalists use generative AI in the newsroom. Again, most of them are using it, not surprisingly, for content production in text and then information gathering and sense making. They were used about aspirational use of generative AI. This is what's interesting to me, because their aspirational use was very similar to their current use. So I don't know, either they can't imagine the things that they haven't done, or they're completely satisfied with the tools that they have in their work. So challenges, concerns, and ethical considerations when it comes to the use of AI in newsrooms. Technical challenges, most people express as their challenges, then ethical challenges. So this technical challenges was this report that was before the LLMs, before ChatGPT release. So I think if you ask them about the use of AI in newsroom, technical challenges will not be the first one anymore, but ethical challenges will be the first one. In concerns in relation to the use of generative AI specifically is no human supervision and inaccurate information, and then bias and reducing quality. Interestingly, they were asked for strategies for ethical use of AI, and their response was not using it, which I don't think will be an option. Responses are quite simple, verifying output guidelines and legal frameworks that many organizations have these days. So I had some slides on a project that I had on applied AI in the journalism challenge, which was run by Open Society Foundation. I don't think I'm going to have time to go through them, but the idea was that this is a kind of an accelerator type program where journalists from across the world could apply. 113, not journalists, journalism organizations that were smaller than 30 in size could apply, and then 12 were selected. they worked with myself and somebody else who's an ex-BBC person as mentors over a number of months. And a number of them were actually zero in terms of AI skills. And through the kind of 2-3 months that the program was running, they managed to create really, really practical and in some cases advanced AI solutions that were actually working already in their news organizations. So that was very, very interesting to watch them do that. And I think also it was a really interesting educational model in terms of how AI could be implemented in news organizations. So this I already said. So I'm not going to give you an idea, kind of. All right, if you want to read more about that, you can read it here. So there's a RFID code and you can read all about the program and how it was. There was also some talk about AI and misinformation today. We have published a policy report in the Institute a few months ago on AI and elections and are we ready to save democracy? So in this, we kind of came up with some simple ideas of how AI could be used or what are the kind of ways we can work to minimize the risks of AI with respect to elections. Again, there is an RFID code. If you are interested to have a look at it, please go and read about it. That's it.
Well, thank you, Bahara. So we have time for a couple of questions that we have been running a bit over, but it's been really engaging and interesting talks. But I'd like to invite the 4 speakers up now. Let's lay some chairs out and just take 1 or 2 questions from the audience, as we've promised, or asked you to keep your questions to the end. So we also honour our part rather than say yes, no, to ask. So I'm not aware there are any that have come through online. Are there any online? There's some chat, but that's also. So I'll open up to the audience for any questions. So there's some hands going up. Have one behind and then Freya.
I one simply and direct because talks were very informative. How can we help? Seems that there are a lot of challenges. Pretty sure that in this room there are a lot of experts involved in many different ways. So how can we help?
So when you're saying how can we help, you're talking about the kind of technical side or
community.
So
what is the best to do? I understand. For us, what is the best to do for us in this situation? That's what I understand. No?
Yeah.
Yes. What is our best choice?
In terms of how to improve things that are.
Yes. So
just very briefly, I think contributing to public knowledge and public information about the issues at hand and what the landscape looks like in order to help build resilience against what is very close to impossible to hold off. The real force there is going to be individuals and their ability to turn away.
But honest to say, I like to add something to it. It's really very scary for me because, for instance, I paint and I talk to artists too. And just it's been the Surrey Open Studios in June. It's normally every year. So I've had a word with a few artists around Surrey. And a few came across with AI. So they're scared because they said someone just can copy my art and sell it somewhere. So I said, my question with regards to this is I find it scary, the topic. How can we detect that, for instance, a masterpiece, a work of art, has been copied, is faked, or it's difficult. So then this is going to be really a real challenge for all of us. And how can it be regulated? And who's going to be in charge of that? That is my main, I think all the time about this. And I think we all like the same boat, but it's really scary. This is so would you like to add something?
Yeah. Well, I can add two things. I mean, one is I don't think we can tell what is the original piece and what is a version of that done by AI. It was funny because I was designing a module piece for a course today, and I was looking for a compilation of images that are fake and not fake, and I just Googled, and BBC had a kind of, I think, pre-AI even, fake or not fake quiz. And I consider myself a relative expert in the area, and most of the times I can tell if an image is fake. And I think out of 8 images, more than half of them, I responded wrong. So even as somebody who was specifically looking for fake images and works in this area, I wasn't able to tell what was fake and what wasn't fake to the degree that is any useful. But at the same time, when it comes to arts, I feel like, how could you stop other people to take your work, make a little bit of change, copy it, make a little bit of change before AI? You couldn't quite do that. Somebody from some other country could copy your work, I don't know, create a new drawing from the ideas you've had, or just copy it, use Photoshop-like tools and make some changes. So even before AI, it was difficult. AI, I think, has just made it easy. That's what I have to say.
You can't copyright style or ideas.
It's probably something to do with copyright, probably more strong copyrights, regulations and
some standards are coming out for certain digital content, which they can track provenance, and one of them is C2PA, which is one of the recommendations that we had in the report we have. And in the context of the BBC, for example, I know that they have been working on the standard, and now they're at the phase that they're implementing it into the newsroom. But with the artistic work, because it's a little bit more creative and open, I guess, unless, I'm sure there will be ways for artists to register their work, but if they're not registered, probably they're also not possible to track.
Can I just add one thing to it? And I don't want to dominate too much, but I think you also have to look at why these companies that are doing the AI, what they're really after. So let's take Suno, for example, which is for making music. Suno just got $150 million injection, I think, into their product for making music. Okay, they're not trying to create a digital audio workstation. You can't build $1 billion company with Ableton Live or Pro Tools. You can build $1 billion company by completely replacing the music industry. And I think you have to understand that that's what's on the table.
Yeah, so I think humans are horrible creatures, right? If I compare this to, I mean, at the end of the day, it's an ethical question. Should I be downloading images, using them for, let's say, for my slides that were generated by AI and exploit essentially things that other people did? But we have been doing this over and over, all over. For instance, I don't know, there's fair trade coffee, let's say. I drink a lot of coffee. Fair trade coffee treats the people that are working hard to actually harvest the beans that create this process, treats them fair, but it's more expensive. There's all this coffee produced at much cheaper prices that are, that exploits essentially the people at the source of it. What are we buying? We're buying the cheapest products, of course. We've done the same type of thing over and over throughout history. We are horrible. So how do we get better? Well, we keep, I think, as humanity, we keep not learning the lessons. I wonder too, what can we do to change those?
We say that to that question, the masterpiece is always in a good gallery or a museum. This is my, you copy, but the master is in, you get what so I know.
Can I say something?
Sorry, excuse me for a moment.
So there are two things to what you're saying. One is using AI and you can perhaps reproduce a great masterpiece. And the second thing to what you're saying is whether that is legal or not. So just me reproducing the masterpiece because I can with AI, it's not illegal. What becomes illegal and what you're speaking about is if I'm selling it and then that becomes a problem. So the regulation in terms of detection is very hard to detect certain things. So you would hear people that cannot distinguish themselves from a deep fake. This is how good things have got. But the question is how you use it. And if you use it illegally or legally, you can use it for good use. You can use it, I don't know, depends on how we define good use, but we can use it to maybe detect a disease faster. No, that's a good use. But if you use it illegally, which is what you're worried about, then that's a matter of the law about you sell goods that are fake, whether they're fake because, as the lady said, they're fake because someone else copied them, or they're fake because AI produced them, they're still fake, and maybe you should not sell them. And the consequence is on the ones that sold fake goods saying they're not, they are not fake, which is already there's law in place for that and counterfeiting. So I think that there's two issues. Yeah, so I'll hand over to you.
I would just add, actually, maybe there's a question here about like deterrence in the sense of you can't control everything. You won't be able to, catch every single instance. But if you have a kind of test case, right, where somebody has a penalty, like there's a huge penalty attached to doing something illegal or something, along the lines of what you're saying. I'm just thinking back to the example, say with the robocalls thing, right, with Biden and the faking of his voice, right? That has happened before. People have tended to, it's not like AI is the first time this has ever happened. But because it was really quite a big story, and the person who'd done it have been caught now, and they are facing prosecution, potentially jail. So the point is that you may not be able to catch every single one, but perhaps if you raise the bar in the regulation and you make certain things like a really big test case, say for Facebook, if they're found liable for billions of dollars, it might change their response. And they have been more circumspect about the EU, for instance, than I think in other contexts, because they know that the EU are going to go toe to toe in terms of, actually regulating them more heavily.
What did you think about the Johansson?
The
with OpenAI.
Yeah, I mean, I think that she had a case in the sense of her voice then being used without her permission. So I would be between the two sides. I think I would be on her side because it's about consent, and that's arguably not just anybody's voice. It's not an accent. It's not a generic. It's actually her own personal copyright that they took.
Do you think it speaks to hubris
of the
on the part of OpenAI to have put that forward?
I don't know if it's hubris. It's probably more about. I'm just thinking as an example. I was thinking actually when we were talking earlier with Steve about a case where I think it was a woman who's a voice. She has a voice. She does advertising, and her voice is used a lot. And she signed a contract with a company. She has made a lot of she made her living out of it. But she didn't, I think, read all of the fine print, and then later they have then used an AI version of her voice, but not given her the money for that. And so she then went and checked and found out from a legal and they said, well, actually, no, when you signed the contract, it was in there. So another thing comes down to this issue about people need to read the fine print. I mean, I know, we don't when we sign up to these terms and conditions, but I think there is a kind of, they need to make it easier is the other thing. I think companies, if you sign up for something and you give away your data or you because a lot of this is powered by the data that we're giving away. So I do think there's a whole kind of digital literacy agenda underpinning this about people understanding what data they're sharing and what they're signing away and what they're doing. And I think it's it's something where I think it's not gelled together yet. And the regulations, they often follow, somewhat further behind. Like in the UK, this is the first time I think where we're actually seeing in this election that the Electoral Commission are insisting that campaigns have these digital imprints on adverts, on political adverts that are being fielded through Facebook ads and things like that. And they've been around since the late sort of 2000s, right? Like it's just now beginning that we've got an agreement. So I think these things will come along in time, and I'm not saying that, that time, it may lead to a loss of earnings, it may lead to people, and I don't think regulation is necessarily going to solve all the problems, but I do think that there is a regulatory, it has to have a regulatory, if not solution, at least approach. And like I said, maybe pull out these cases where you can make it almost like an example, because then it serves as a deterrent. Which I don't think necessarily gives you much reassurance, but.
Thank you very much. I think we've run over time to the point that we ought to close the kind of panel session now. So let's thank everyone, thank all the speakers again for some very engaging talks. And so thanks everyone online who joined. There's the applause going up on the screen as well. Those that are here, we have refreshments outside so we can carry on the discussions. And if you didn't get a chance to ask your question here in the open session, then you can ask it over a drink and a snack. But thanks everyone for coming today. It's been really enjoyable. So we'll close the session here. Thank you.
And I say,